father is not a man who repeats himself. He grew up in Savannah, Georgia, the kind of man who learned early that words cost something, so he spent them carefully. He built his construction company from one truck and a borrowed nail gun into the kind of business that puts its name on highway overpasses and hospital wings. He wore the same style of work boots for 30 years. He still does. He raised me in a house on Abercorn Street, 3 blocks from Forsyth Park, with a front porch that caught the evening wind off the river. My mother left when I was 4. He never explained it beyond saying she needed something different. He didn't say it with bitterness. He just said it the way he'd say the weather had changed, and then he made dinner and we moved on. He called me capable before he ever called me pretty. I didn't understand what a gift that was until I was 29 years old, standing in a hospital break room in scrubs that smelled like antiseptic, realizing my bank account had $43 in it, 3 days before rent was due. I had been a nurse for 6 years. I worked nights at Memorial Health. I was good at my job. I was also, I know now, extraordinarily easy to deceive. Not because I was stupid, but because I trusted the wrong person completely and never thought to look down and check the ground beneath my feet. His name was Connor. I met him at a friend's engagement party in the spring. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming. Quietly, selectively, as though you were being let in on something private. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He remembered things. 3 weeks later, he brought me coffee exactly the way I described liking it once, in passing. I thought that was love. I didn't yet understand it was research. We dated for 14 months. He was in commercial real estate, he said. The hours were irregular, the income unpredictable, the deals always just about to close. I didn't think much of it. I was working nights. We moved through each other's lives in the gaps. My father met him twice before we got engaged. The second time, walking back to the car, my father was quiet for longer than usual. Then he said, "He's smooth." I asked what that meant. He said, "I haven't figured that out yet." I thought he was being overprotective. I was 30. I had my own apartment, my own career, my own savings. I told myself I didn't need his approval. We got married in October, small ceremony, Bonaventure Cemetery Garden, my idea. His mother stood in the front row in a dress that cost more than my wedding gown and spent the reception telling people the venue was unconventional. His brother stood next to Connor and smiled at everyone with the particular ease of a man who has never paid full price for anything. I found out about the money 4 months into our marriage, and I found out by accident. My father had never told me directly. That was his mistake and he has owned it since. What he had done 6 months before our wedding was set up a joint account in both my name and Connor's, his logic being that he wanted to ensure my financial security within the marriage, the way his own father had done for his sister decades ago. He deposited $180,000 into that account every month. He assumed I knew. He assumed Connor had told me. He assumed because he was a man who built things on solid foundations that a husband would naturally tell his wife about money flowing into their shared account. Connor told me nothing. What Connor did was add his brother as an authorized user within the first 2 weeks of our marriage. What Connor did was change the mailing address on all account statements to a P.O. box I never knew existed. What Connor did was set up automatic email forwarding so that any bank notification sent to my address went directly to a folder he managed through a shared family email account I had no access to. He had planned it. That's the part that still sits in my chest like a stone. Not the theft itself, but the preparation for it. The patience of it. For 14 months I worked nights. I picked up extra shifts when I could. I packed lunch because groceries were tight. I told myself this was just what early marriage looked like. 2 people building something, leaning into the lean years. Connor talked often about deals closing, about Q4 projections, about a commercial property in Pooler that was going to change everything. I believed him. He used the right words in the right order, and I believed him. His mother would come by on weekends sometimes. She had opinions about everything. The way I organized the linen closet, the fact that I bought store-brand dish soap, the throw pillows I'd chosen for the couch. She delivered these observations in the tone of someone doing you a kindness. Connor never said anything when she did it. He would find something to look at across the room. I told myself he was conflict avoidant. I filed it away. I was 7 months pregnant when I took a travel nurse contract at St. Joseph's in Augusta. We needed the money. Connor said he was supportive. He drove me to my first shift and kissed me at the entrance. I worked 4 12-hour shifts a week and drove home on my days off. I was tired in a way that felt structural, like fatigue had moved into my bones and set up a permanent residence. One evening in February, I was assigned to a private suite on the 4th floor. High-end cardiac recovery patient, the chart said, which at St. Joseph's meant private room, premium meal service, valet parking validation slips left on the nightstand. I knocked and entered. The man in the bed was Connor's brother. He was on his phone. He looked up, and we stared at each other for exactly 2 seconds before his expression did something complicated and he said, "Hey, Clara." He said it the way people say something when they're deciding very quickly what to say next. I did my job. I checked his vitals, updated his chart, answered his questions about the discharge process. I was a professional. My hands were steady, and the whole time I was watching the room, the monogrammed robe on the hook behind the door, the bottle of scotch on the bedside table that definitely had not come from the hospital, the room service tray with 2 plates. The second one cleared. Someone had been here. I went back to the nurse's station. I asked the admissions coordinator casually how long he'd been there. 4 days, she said. Checked in Sunday. I asked if anyone was listed on the billing. She couldn't tell me, of course, but she mentioned the insurance wasn't covering much of it. Self-pay for the premium suite, she said. He put down a card at check-in. She tilted the screen slightly, and I saw the last 4 digits. I knew those last 4 digits. They were the last 4 digits of my debit card. I drove home that night in the rain. I didn't call Connor. I sat in the hospital parking garage for 40 minutes looking at my phone. Then I called my father. He answered on the second ring. It was 11 at night. He said, "Tell me." I told him everything I knew, which was still only half of it. He said, "Do you have access to any joint accounts in your name?" I said I didn't think so. He was quiet for a moment and said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't move anything. Don't say anything to Connor. Call me from the hospital tomorrow during your lunch break. Can you do that?" I said yes. He said, "Good." He hung up and called his attorney. His attorney called a forensic accountant. The forensic accountant spent 6 days pulling records. What they found was $2.3 million moved through that account in 14 months. My father's deposits, consistent and documented $180,000 every single month, every single one intercepted. Connor and his brother had built a system. The brother managed 2 LLCs registered in Tennessee. Connor moved money between them in amounts just under the federal reporting threshold. Some of it went to property, a short-term rental condo in Hilton Head, a storage unit business in Bluffton, a membership at a private club in Sea Island that ran $8,000 a year. The rest went to things the forensic accountant described in his report as lifestyle expenditures, and that I later understood to mean exactly the kind of life Connor had always implied he was already living when I met him. When I got home from my last shift that week, my father was sitting on our front steps. Connor's car was in the driveway. My father had his work boots on and his hands rested on his knees, and he looked exactly the way he looks when he is about to make a decision that will cost him something. Connor opened the door before we knocked. I don't know what he saw in my face or my father's, but he knew. People like Connor always know a half-second too late. My father did not raise his voice. He sat down at the kitchen table and set 2 documents on it. One was a printed summary from the forensic accountant. The other was a wire transfer log, every deposit, every transfer, every withdrawal, the Tennessee LLCs listed by name. He pushed them across the table toward Connor and said, "I'd like you to explain this to my daughter." Connor tried 3 different things. He tried confusion. I don't understand what I'm looking at. He tried justification. I was managing the finances. That's what we agreed. He tried turning it on me. She never asked questions. She never showed any interest in our accounts. My father let him finish each one. Then he said, "You have 20 minutes to get what you need from this house. My attorney will be in contact Monday morning." Connor said, "You can't just." My father said, 20 minutes. Connor left in 19. His brother was discharged from St. Left. Joseph's that same week and drove directly to Tennessee. The attorneys tracked him. The divorce took 8 months. Connor's attorneys argued that the money had been a marital asset, that he had been managing it in good faith, that the LLCs were legitimate investments. My attorney, the one my father's attorney referred me to, a woman named who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and spoke about financial fraud the way my father spoke about structural engineering, precisely and with complete authority, dismantled that argument over the course of 3 depositions. The bank records were clear. The forensic accountant's report was 47 pages. The wire transfers to the brothers' account showed a pattern too consistent to be anything other than intentional. The U.S. Attorney's Office opened a federal investigation. Wire fraud. The threshold for federal wire fraud charges is a single interstate transfer. Connor and his brother had made over 200. Connor pleaded guilty to wire fraud and money laundering in a federal court in Savannah 11 months after that night on the front steps. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution. His brother took a plea deal separately. 3 years, different facility. The Hilton Head condo was sold. The Bluffton business was liquidated. The Sea Island membership, it turned out, could not be transferred, so that particular $8,000 simply evaporated, which I found satisfying in a way I didn't feel the need to analyze. My daughter was born 6 weeks before Connor's sentencing hearing. She arrived early, the way she has continued to do most things, ahead of schedule, unconcerned with anyone else's timeline. My father was in the waiting room. When the nurse brought him in to see her, he stood at the side of the bassinet for a long moment without saying anything. Then he said, "She has your mother's hands." It was the first time he had said anything about my mother in years. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just held his hand, and he let me. I named her June. He calls her Juniper. She calls him Pop, because that's what she decided when she started talking, and none of us corrected it. We live in a house in Thunderbolt now, close enough to the river that on still mornings you can hear the shrimp boats. My father comes for dinner most Sundays. He fixed the back screen door last month without being asked. He taught June how to use a level before she could reliably use a spoon. There are things I know now that I wish I had known before, and things I knew before that I understand differently now. I knew that my father raised me to be capable. What I understand now is that being capable doesn't protect you from someone who spends months studying how to use your capabilities against you. Connor didn't target my weakness. He targeted my work ethic, my trust, my belief that a good person would not do a thing so methodically terrible. He borrowed the shape of a good person and wore it for 3 years, and I don't blame myself for not being able to see through it. I do think about the women who come through the ER sometimes, the ones who have been managing on nothing while the person beside them has been managing everything, and I recognize something now that I didn't before. I also know this. My father made a mistake by not telling me about the money directly, by assuming the conversation had happened when it hadn't. He said so, plainly, about 6 months after everything was settled. He said, "I should have sat across from you and told you the number and watched you write it down. I assumed, and that assumption cost us both." That was a hard thing for him to say. He is not a man who easily says he was wrong. I told him that what mattered was what happened after, and he nodded once, which for him is a full emotional response. What happened after was this. My father did not look for the right moment to step in. He stepped in at 11 o'clock at night, in the rain, when his daughter called him from a parking garage and said she needed him. That is the thing about people who are not naturally expressive. When it counts, you can feel the weight of everything they haven't said bearing down behind the action they do take. He was not a man who repeated himself. He didn't have to. There's a version of this story where I spend years being angry at myself. I've thought about that version. It would have been easy to live there. In the self-blame, in the replaying of every conversation I didn't question, every bank statement I didn't ask to see. Every weekend, Connor came home with a new excuse, and I accepted it because I was tired and I trusted him, and I believed that trust was the foundation of something real. But here's what I've come to understand. Slowly, the way you understand things that cost you something to learn, Connor didn't succeed because I was foolish. He succeeded because he was methodical. There's a difference, and it matters. He spent months before our wedding building the infrastructure of the deception, the P.O. box, the forwarded emails, the brothers' LLC waiting like a bucket under a leak. That kind of preparation doesn't happen to you because you fail to pay attention. It happens because someone decided, deliberately and in advance, to make sure you couldn't. What I know about cause and effect now is this. Every action Connor took had a logic to it, and that logic eventually produced consequences that were proportional to the choices. Not immediately, not neatly, but with a consistency that, looking back, feels almost like arithmetic. He built a machine designed to extract money quietly over time, and when that machine was exposed, it didn't just stop, it reversed. The forensic accountant's report became the federal indictment. The offshore transfers became the evidence. The care he'd taken to hide things became the paper trail that convicted him. He was sentenced to 4 years not in spite of how carefully he'd planned, but in part because of it. The planning proved intent. Internment the charge. I think about my father in that hospital parking garage conversation sometimes. He didn't say, "I'll fix it." He said, "Don't move anything. Don't say anything. Call me tomorrow." That's a man who understood that the right response to discovering something this serious wasn't emotion, it was precision. He had built things his whole life. He understood that when a structure fails, you don't swing a hammer in the dark, you assess first. Then you act with everything you have. I've tried to carry that into how I move through the world now, assessing before I react, asking questions I used to assume were rude, looking at the ground beneath my feet instead of assuming it's solid because it should be. June is 2.5 now. She is opinionated about her socks and deeply committed to feeding herself with a fork even when a spoon would be faster. She is, in every way I can measure, entirely herself. My father looks at her the way he's always looked at things he's built. Not with pride exactly, more with a quiet satisfaction that the thing exists and is standing and is good. I didn't emerge from this story wise. I came out of it shaken, then cautious, then, eventually, clearer. That's not wisdom. That's just what happens when something that cost you a great deal also taught you something true. You carry both. The cost doesn't erase the lesson, and the lesson doesn't cancel the cost. You just learn to hold them in the same hand and keep moving. My father raised me to be capable. Connor borrowed that quality and used it against me. And my father, when it mattered, showed me what it actually looks like when someone has both the means and the character to stand behind the people they love. Not with grand gestures, but with a phone answered on the second ring at 11 o'clock at night, work boots on, ready. That's the part I'm still learning from.